Okay, so why is glyphosate a problem?
It's a problem because it kills very, very effectively. Glyphosate also kills microorganisms, but it kills them selectively. Some it actually leaves alone, and unfortunately the ones that aren't affected by it are the ones that cause a major amount of damage. The other thing we're finding is that it actually causes damage to the microorganisms in the human gut and the animal gut, and again it does this selectively, so that what we're getting is an imbalanced gut flora, and that's causing major problems. And this is one of the things that we're going to be talking about in this video.
So what you're saying is elements of this herbicide Roundup is being used on our food, and as we eat that food, residual chemical presence on that food is being transferred to our own digestive system and is causing problems through killing off bacteria and microorganisms that we need to digest food.
That's exactly right, but it's not just the food that we're eating. The research that's been carried on recently shows that glyphosate is in the soil, is in the water, and is in the air. There was one study done in something like 14 countries in Europe, and this was only just recently completed, where people who live in urban areas, in cities, who have never used glyphosate, who've never had any exposure to it, contain glyphosate in their bodies. So if these people have got it, where did it come from? So it must be everywhere. And they've even found evidence of it at the South and the North Pole, which is terrifying.
Well, how does this herbicide actually kill plants?
It kills them through obstructing something called the Shikimate pathways, which is a very complex series of reactions that occur within plants and to create things like amino acids. We don't have those because the Shikimate pathways are used for the plant to create the food that we eat. We rely on those plants. That's the justification that Monsanto has also always used to say it can't hurt humans. But what they haven't thought about, or what we haven't thought about, is the fact that it also kills the bacteria, and that's where the big problem is. Another issue with the glyphosate is that it operates by chelating or joining up with the elements that are in the plant or in the soil, making them unavailable for the plant to use. For example, zinc will be chelated by the glyphosate, and then the plant cannot use that zinc. So what this means is that the elements and the minerals in the soil that the plants need are no longer available for it.
So what does this process do to the soil health and the soil's long-term viability?
That's the big worry. Obviously, the soil is a living organism, and it's made up of millions and billions of very, very tiny creatures. And the role of those creatures is actually to feed the plants. As a farmer or a grower, a gardener, you think it's your job to fertilise the garden so that the plants have lots to eat. But in fact, what you're doing is actually feeding the microorganisms, and it's their job to feed the plants. Now, if this product kills off many of the microorganisms, then they're not going to be able to do that. And the whole soil is a very living structure. And if you're going to kill off half the microorganisms in the soil because they are very, very tiny plants, then you're going to destruct the soil itself. And this is what's happening. We're actually rendering the soil infertile. And added to that is the practice by many commercial farmers of using chemical type fertilizers, which actually are derived from World War II. These are made of the substances that we used to make bombs. And we're now using that very, very simple elements of things like nitrogen and phosphorus, potassium, to add to the soil. And that actually destroys the humus in the soil very fast. So we've got a soil that's both being damaged by the killing of the microorganisms, but we've also got another process which is involving the chemical fertilizers, which destroys the humus in which the microorganisms live. And in doing so, of course, it releases all the elements in that humus so that plants have something to grow, until such point where we have no humus in the soil. And unfortunately in Australia, we're actually getting to that point very, very fast. We used to have 5% humus content in our soils. We're now down to less than 1%. And a soil with less than 1% of humus in it is actually a dead soil.
So just to back up for a minute, humus is the organic content in the soil.
That's right. All the, well, it's actually the dead microorganisms, but it's also any material that is derived from plants, or horse manure or cow manure or anything of that sort. What some of the studies that have been carrying out at present are showing is that because of the use of glyphosate and because of the damage to the soil microorganisms, we're getting a resurgence of a number of very, very serious diseases like wilt, which we thought we'd actually got rid of. They're coming back, and they're coming back even bigger and better than they were before. And these studies that have been carried out attribute this fact to the use of Roundup.
Okay, Monsanto have justified the use of this product called Roundup by referring to research they've done themselves based on the idea that plants and animals are completely dissimilar, and yes, it kills plants, but it's completely harmless to human beings. I remember one quote where they were saying you could drink this stuff or you could use it as table salt.
That's absolutely right. Yes, so because they have always claimed it interferes with the Shigimate pathways, we don't have them as people, therefore it's safe for us to use. But the fact is that there are many similarities between plants and humans. We look very, very different, but in fact we have a lot of things that we do that are exactly the same as plants. And if you think about it, plants and people need sunlight, we need water, and we need food. And the food that we need is actually the elements like calcium, molybdenum, sulfur, zinc, which the body uses then to create things like proteins and amino acids. The same thing happens in the plants. Plants, it's been found, actually communicate. They communicate with the microorganisms in the soil, and they communicate with each other. The fascinating story is that if a tree, for example, needs to have a particular type of element or a group of elements, it actually produces a sugar which will feed the microorganisms that will give the plant back that particular mix of elements that it requires. So the microorganisms multiply around the root of the plant, they feed the plant then can produce seeds or leaves or flowers or whatever it wants to have those elements for. So the tree is actually communicating probably it's a sort of bribery if you like, but it's actually attracting the microorganisms it needs, the needs that it has in order to grow and be healthy. Plants also communicate with each other, we're finding, so that's a very interesting study. Some of the other similarities are that plants and ourselves have the same chemical composition, and in the same amounts for each chemical. We both ideally should contain 70% water. We both need sunshine to grow. And we both also have energy fields, and the integrity of that energy field actually attracts or deters things like pests and diseases. We find with the organic process that we follow here, the pests don't attack our plants as long as they have the elements that they need in order to grow in the right balance. And that's been an extraordinary learning for me, and most people wouldn't appreciate this. They think you have to get rid of pests and diseases using some sort of poison, but that's not true. A healthy plant does not get any pests attack it, and it doesn't get disease.